Learning from AlphaGo. We live in the AI decade. This is the decade in which AI is going to transform everything. By the end of the decade, by 2030, I think that AI is going to be taught in every single school of architecture throughout the world, and it'll be in use in every single architectural office throughout the world, and it is going to transform the discipline of architecture. In this talk today, I want to argue that while back in the 1970s we had Learning from Las Vegas, and that was a very influential book in helping to change attitudes towards architecture. The most important influence on architecture in some ways is going to be AI, and AlphaGo in particular is going to change the way in which we understand architectural practice. What I'm showing you here is an example of the use of deep learning, of a generative adversarial network, a technique for hallucinating, for generating images. And this is one that's was done back in 2018, in fact, by Refik Anadol, the media artist, and it's based on a database of images by Zaha Hadid architects. And what happens with GANs, with this process in its version of style GANs, is that you upload thousands of images onto the computer, and then you use AI to be able to work its way through do a latent spacewalk and hallucinate other possible images, interpolate based on the database other possible designs for Zaha Hadid. And there are certain moments in this video when suddenly you begin to glimpse another possible design that absolutely could have been made by Zaha herself, and it suddenly comes out of the computer and reveals itself. In a moment, we're going to see just one such design. And here you go. That, in fact, is the image that I chose for the front cover of my book on AI, which is coming out in December 2021, Architecture in the Age of Artificial Intelligence, an introduction to AI for architects. I think it's the first book coming out in the English language about AI. So one of the things that we know already is that AI has this capacity to be generative. In the old days, it was thought that maybe that only human beings had the capacity to imagine something that didn't exist, that machines did not have dreams. And this is these are the thoughts of the Japanese computational architect Makoto Sei Watanabe. Actually, he's more open to the possibility of eventually computers being able to generate new forms. And what has become very clear already is that through style GANs and other techniques, we are able to hallucinate images that don't exist. In this case, these are people who do not exist. In fact, there's a website you can go to, This Person Does Not Exist, where you can hallucinate images of faces, all completely fictitious, but all utterly convincing. And it's been the kind of progress in this field that really has opened up the possibility for how architects might begin to produce solutions or suggestions for novel buildings that themselves do not exist. This is the work of Korb Himmelblau, the project called Deep Himmelblau. The mastermind behind this is, I think, Daniel Bolojan, who is one of the leading AI experts in the world. And this gives you an example of the most progressive state of development in terms of AI in the architectural office. Here is a mainstream architectural office, well, not mainstream, but certainly a well-known and very progressive architectural office, Korb Himmelblau, based in Vienna in Austria, using AI to hallucinate other possible buildings based on a data set of images of their work. And there are many other forms of research that have been done. This is, in fact, Daniel Bolojan's own personal research, where he's been looking at the Sagrada Familia by Antoni Gaudi and hallucinating other possible forms by using a style GANs, whereby you use two unpaired data sets and extrapolate other possible forms by effectively breeding images of the Sagrada Familia, in this case off against images of a video, a walk through the woods. So we're already seeing both in the experimental offices and also in the use of personal research a kind of form of new forms of articulation. And here we have the video of the woods, the forest that has been paired up against the Sagrada Familia. Equally, we're seeing in schools of architecture, and this is one of my own students at Florida International University, Fernando Salcedo, who has been again using cycle GANs here. And on the right hand side, you can see what happens when you train a neural network on the images of a particular building by Zaha Hadid, a research center in Saudi Arabia, and then use it as a lens by which to interpret other things. So on the left hand side, Fernando's wardrobe, his t-shirts and things, are themselves being paired up against this and extrapolating other forms. In this case, it's a neural network trained on some generic buildings in downtown Miami. And here on the left-hand side, Fernando's tie is itself hallucinating a potential building. So it's clear that already, both in the practice and academia, AI is having a major impact. I think one thing that we've got to understand now is that there is a difference between AI and human intelligence, and the understanding in the past that we thought that AI was necessarily inferior to human intelligence needs to be challenged. This, for example, is what would have been until recently a standard understanding of how we define AI. Margaret Bowden, the grand old lady, as it were, of AI, who established some of the most important research centers in terms of exploring these fields, came up with this suggestion: AI seeks to make computers do the sorts of things that minds can do. AI seeks to make computers do the sort of things that minds can do. Actually, AI can do things beyond the capacity of what humans can do. And that itself has become very clear in recent years. This was maybe the first hint of that when Garry Kasparov, the then world champion at chess, was beaten by Deep Blue at a game of chess. No one expected it. And Garry Kasparov himself takes a kind of positive view on this. That it actually was a human, that it was a human invention, AI, and therefore is very significant as a human achievement. But nonetheless, he comments that we have to understand that everything that we know how to do, machines eventually will do better than us. I want to look at the next step in this sequence when AI takes on the game of Go. Infinitely more complex than the game of chess, and there are more moves in Go, potential moves in Go, than there are atoms in the universe, or so it is said. And that means that we have to move beyond the straightforward expert systems that were used in terms of for the match against Garry Kasparov at chess, into the realm of learning systems, where you use deep learning itself. You can't possibly train AI on all the possible games out there, because there are more possible moves than you could ever imagine. Therefore, you have to use these learning systems, and there were three separate systems that were used here: separate neural networks, a policy network, a value network, and a Monte Carlo tree search, that were all used in this particular game. So this was a match between DeepMind, a company set up by Demis Hassabis in London and now owned by Google, where they took on Lee Sedol, the Korean grandmaster. He wasn't world champion, but he's one of the leading Go players in the world. And of course, everybody expected Lee Sedol to win this particular match. But what was remarkable is it didn't go quite according to plan. There is, in fact, a very good documentary of this particular match, which I'll show the trailer to, just so you can get a sense about what the match was all about.
Go is the world's oldest continuously played board game. It is one of the simplest and also most abstract.
Beating a professional player at Go is a long-standing challenge of artificial intelligence.
Everything we've ever tried in AI just falls over when you try the game of Go.
The number of possible configurations of the board is more than the number of atoms in the universe.
AlphaGo found a way to learn how to play Go.
So far, AlphaGo has beaten every challenge we've given it, but we won't know its true strength until we play somebody who is at the top of the world, like Lee Sedol.
A match like no other is about to get underway in South Korea.
Lee Sedol is to Go what Roger Federer is to tennis.
Just the very thought of a machine playing a human is inherently intriguing.
The place is a madhouse.
Welcome to the DeepMind Challenge.
The whole world is watching.
Can Lee Sedol find AlphaGo's weakness? Whoa. Is there, in fact, a weakness?
The game kind of turned on its axis.
Look at his face.
That is not a confident face.
It's developing into a very, very dangerous fight.
Hold the phone. Lee has left the room.
In the end, it is about pride.
I hate that something went wrong.
Yeah, it's made in tech.
It's got to pronounce America.
These ideas that are driving AlphaGo are going to drive our future.
This is it, folks.
I recommend that documentary. It is particularly good, but I want to pick out on one particular comment that came out from that trailer. These ideas that are driving AlphaGo are going to drive our future. This is absolutely correct. And there was one particular moment in the match that really brought home the capacity of AI. And that was game 2, move 37, a move that has now changed the game of Go forever. And here it was. I mean, to those like myself who don't play Go, this was kind of like wouldn't mean very much, but this particular move was a surprise move, a shocking move. And in fact, at the time, they thought it was a mistake, a computer glitch. Why would anyone make that move? It wasn't an obvious move. It'd never been made before. And there were actually a series of these moves. They were referred to as slack moves, where it was not at all clear why that move had been made immediately. And yet further down the line, some moves later, it became clear how strategically brilliant those moves were. And this was the comment by Lee Sedol after that game 2. Yesterday, I was surprised, but today I am speechless. And one of the obvious comments really was that Fan Hui was commenting on the match, realized that AI, in his terms, could be creative. And Lee Sedol even went so far as to say that it showed us that moves that we humans may have thought are creative were actually conventional. What AlphaGo had done had transformed the game of Go and had really put human beings in their place. In fact, a few years later, in 2019, Lee Sedol gave up the game of Go with the comment, "This is an entity that cannot be defeated." But I want to draw attention to a much earlier comment by Alan Turing, who had predicted or envisioned the possibility of AI before even the term artificial intelligence had been coined. And he makes this comment of that he expects computers to be able to generate all sorts of things, including to compose sonnets. But then he says at the end of this, though the comparison is perhaps a little unfair because a sonnet written by a machine will be better appreciated by another machine. Or we can put it another way and say that we human beings might not grasp the possibility of what AI can do because we can't even imagine those possibilities. And I think this is a crucial challenge that faces human beings. And this is why I would side on with Elon Musk over Jack Ma, whereas Jack Ma makes this comment, I never in my life say human beings will be controlled by machines. It's impossible. Human beings can never create another thing that is smarter than human beings. And Elon Musk responds to that. People underestimate the capability of AI. They sort of think that it is a smart human, but it's going to be much smarter than the smartest human you will ever know. The biggest mistake I see people making is to assume that they're smart. And what has become very clear is that the capacity of artificial intelligence in some areas, in some spheres, goes well beyond those of human beings. One of the lessons of AlphaGo, well, the first lesson is that it changed the whole world in terms of investment in AI. This is a book by Kaifu Lee, who looks at the kind of the rivalry that's now going on between Silicon Valley in the States and China, and the New World Order. Um, uh, uh, the crucial moment when this happened was actually that match of AlphaGo, which to those of us in the West, for whom Go is not so important, it might have escaped us. But in China, there were millions of viewers watching this match, and all of a sudden they began to realize what AI was capable of. So Kaifu Lee refers to this as the Sputnik moment. The Sputnik moment for the United States happened in 1957 when the Russians sent the Sputnik satellite into space, and the Americans realized they were way behind in the space race. And this event, this Sputnik moment, is what led the Americans to establish NASA and in the race for exploration of space, and of course ultimately led to Apollo 11 and to human beings walking on the moon. And this was the result of this. President Xi makes an announcement that China is going to invest in AI with the view of overtaking the United States by 2030. And it seems that China is well on its way to doing that. And likewise in Korea, the president at the time expressed her gratitude. Above all, Korean society is ironically lucky that thanks to the AlphaGo shock, we have learnt the importance of AI before it is too late. And let's not assume it's going to be one-sided, because there are many things happening in the States right now, including OpenAI, that are really transforming the world, and things are happening that are changing the horizon every single day. What I want to argue also, though, is not simply that that game of AlphaGo led to huge changes in terms of investment in AI, but also I believe that it showed us how AI is going to change the future of architecture. And one of the things I want to sort of distinction I want to make is between what I might call design and planning, urban design and urban planning. Whereas design is more concerned about aesthetics, some of the work I showed you earlier, the kind of hallucination of images, urban planning is more to do with strategic logics. And that is an area, I think, where AI has a vast superiority over human beings. Harvard Hoagland is the CEO of a company called Spacemaker AI that was recently purchased by Autodesk, but until then had been one of the two leading companies in terms of developing AI software for architecture. And what is interesting, and don't think about this architecture and think, well, okay, it's a conventional architecture. Maybe it is, but what is interesting are the lessons that they learned at Spacemaker AI through working with AI in terms of its logic. This is a project that they did for a coastal site in Norway, where they used AI to analyze various aspects of the site, and in this case, looking at thermal comfort, looking at the wind and so on and so on. Then this is another project that they did in Norway, which used AI to evaluate and to optimize the site itself. In itself, not aesthetically so progressive, but what is so interesting is the method of operating. And what I find astonishing is that, in a sense, the lesson of AlphaGo, the idea that AI could come up with solutions that no human being would have thought about, are exactly what happened in terms of using AI for urban planning. The places where the architects thought that it would be smart to build tall buildings, and the places where they thought it would be smart to build a dense wall, all the things they intuitively thought would be smart because they had hundreds of projects of experience were flipped around. So what happened was the computer was able to find a pattern as to how to solve that site that you would never have come up with yourself. I mean, the point here is that when you're dealing with an urban context, the number of factors you need to take into account go well beyond what the human mind can deal with, and this is where AI shows itself to be superior. And there again, we see exact sort of parallel, as it were, of the match between AlphaGo and Lee Sedol. What I would also say is that the writing's on the wall in many ways, in that what's become clear is that Spacemaker has found that now increasingly clients are insisting that their architects use AI. And the reason for this is obvious. They want to ensure they get the maximum return on investment for their site. They want to optimize their returns. So it seems to me in the future that is going to be the key driver of change, and every client is going to insist on architects using AI. They also make the comment that we believe that the workplace of the future, architects using AI will replace architects that don't. I'm not quite sure it's going to be exactly like that. AI is going to become increasingly prevalent. It's going to work its way into the architectural office. Everyone is going to be forced to be using AI, and that seems to be quite obvious. The other practice I'd like to refer to, also founded in 2016, and also one of the two leading firms in terms of AI, is the firm XCool, founded by Wanyu He, who is also one of my DDES students at Florida International University. XCool refers to the fact that Wanyu used to work for OMA, for Rem Koolhaas, X-Koolhaas, and XCool, of course, according to the Urban Dictionary, means hypercool. And what is interesting about the work of XCool is that it wasn't AlphaGo itself, but it was the next generation of AI produced by DeepMind that really inspired them. AlphaGo Zero was able to teach itself to play Go without any prior instructions, simply through reinforcement learning. It was able to play millions of games against itself, 4.9 million games in 3 days. That is the equivalent of 20 games of Go a second. 20 games of Go a second. We can't even get our minds around that. But as a result of that, it was able to learn the game of Go on its own. And that was what led to XCool developing forms of reinforcement learning and other forms of deep learning to produce a new strategy for devising buildings. And of course, they use the cloud. Via the cloud, you can access greater GPUs. You also, in this present day, you have much more data available. There is a huge amount of investment, and so on and so on. There are many factors that are fueling this incredible investment in AI with companies like XCool. Earlier on, I showed you an image of StyleGANs generating faces that did not exist. This is an example, an architectural version of the same thing. For a while, XCool hosted a site called This Building Does Not Yet Exist. They're able to hallucinate possible buildings through the use of deep learning. And not only that, and these are some of the outcomes that they are able to generate using this thing, they're also now working on ways of finding ways to incorporate all the different procedures within the production of a building into one single platform. And that, to my mind, is going to revolutionize the world of architecture. To my mind, then, the two models we should be thinking about in terms of the development of AI in architecture are both AlphaGo and also the development of the self-driving car. The reason why the self-driving car is so significant is that it shows us exactly how this will happen in architecture. Those of you who drive Teslas will know that the way that Tesla became self-driving was through a gradual process, an incremental process whereby the software updates were offered over time until eventually we got to the point that the Tesla car was effectively self-driving. And of course, there is a sinister message there, because once you have a self-driving car, you no longer need a driver. And once you have an AI that can generate designs of buildings completely autonomously, perhaps you no longer need an architect. So what I want to argue here by way of conclusion is that it's not simply that these ideas that are driving AlphaGo are going to drive the future of architecture in the future. They are already driving the future of architecture in the present, and we ignore them at our peril. Learning from AlphaGo. Forget learning from Las Vegas, learning from AlphaGo is going to be the most important lesson that we are going to learn in the 21st century. AI is going to transform the discipline of architecture and urban planning completely. We ignore the lessons of AlphaGo at our peril. Thank you.